Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, whatever it is that you're tuned in to Africa Football Business Show this evening. It's that day, it's Thursday, it's all about what is Africa football, and today it's no different. And just to tell you that today is a special session, and this episode is actually brought to you by the Foundation for Africa in collaboration with Sports Legal. And as usual, we have a very interesting show, very educative show lined up for you. We are talking about human trafficking in Africa, in football. That is the Africa's Achilles heel. It is a problem that has been bedeviling Africa and also some other parts of the world, as we'll be hearing from our guest tonight. And before I introduce our able guest, Mr. Fred Lord, I want also to pass my regards to our partners, that is OTB Africa, Palmer Sports, See Beyond Leadership Forum, and of course UNICAF. Thank you so much for making things happen. Well, Mr. Fred is a man vast with knowledge in terms of security, in terms of human trafficking, and he's here tonight to actually bring us up to speed with what is happening and what is being done to ensure that this vice is curtailed. Mr. Fred Lord, thank you so much for giving the Africa Football Business Show your time tonight. Kindly introduce yourself to our audience and tell us what is your interest in football in general.
Thanks very much, Florence. It's a pleasure to be here on the show. And yeah, sure. Look, a little bit about my background. I'm from Australia and have been involved in law enforcement for a couple of decades, particularly in the fields of anti-corruption. And after that was head of anti-corruption for Interpol, based in Lyon, France, representing the 192 member countries in relation to corruption across all aspects of crime. And later on was the program manager for the Interpol FIFA Integrity Training Initiative. And now currently working with the ICSS, been with them for about 8 years. Current role is the Director of Sport Integrity and Protection. And yeah, so over a period of time, I've got some personal interests in football myself. I currently sit on as a director on the board of the Herefordshire Football Association as an independent director, and I'm also a qualified level 1 coach and welfare officer. So I'm very interested in grassroots football as well. So yes, I'm very interested in football, but particularly now with the work that we do, the importance of really looking after kids in football.
All right, very impressive. Thank you so much once again. Looking forward to learning a lot and getting to understand the current situation and where we need to go as Africa to ensure that this vice is curtailed and that footballers get to play in safe environments. Now, you have a wealth of experience in terms of security matters from a global perspective. But why is your interest in human trafficking, especially in football and in particular in Africa? And do we have this problem in other parts of the world, in other continents as well?
Yeah, look, sure. Look, I mean, my interest isn't particularly focused on the one activity, but it's the actual aspects of trafficking of youth through football has come across our desk on a few occasions now in relation to reports that we've received through our hotline, which we have, which is based in Canada, and we can receive intelligence and information about a number of different crime types that are around the world. And we've been approached on a number of occasions by scouts, by legal scouts, competent scouts who provide us information in relation to young athletes who have been approached by I suppose corrupt scouts themselves. And so a lot of those issues have been focused within the continent of Africa because of the volume of quality players. The volume of youth and sometimes, in relation to the lacking of various governance in some aspects. So therefore, it creates a perfect storm for organised criminals and fake agents to get away with what they're doing in relation to committing fraud on young athletes and at times, obviously, transporting those young kids out of their country into a foreign location. But due to the aspects of COVID-19, that's probably impeded a lot of the activities of organised criminals in relation to moving kids across borders. And therefore, we've seen a rise in more of a 419 type style fraud betting scam where they're basically reaching out to kids to offer them various opportunities in exchange for prepaid cash to provide these opportunities for them. Hence the reason why they'll enter into these agreements, and obviously after they've paid their money, they no longer hear anything back. But that's due to the COVID angle, so we've seen that increase in that aspect. But yeah, look, this happens in a number of countries. We've had reports from the Americas and from kids from Brazil. I think there was a recent article I was reached out to by a colleague who's an integrity officer in one of the Eastern European football associations, where there was a young British kid at the age of 18 who was tricked into paying £950. So it's not just a centralised issue within Africa; it is a global issue, and it's basically opportunistic fraudsters and criminals who are doing what they can to make some money.
Very sad indeed. But when you look at Africa, to be precise, I know you've touched a bit in terms of weak mechanisms and in terms of also governance. But going deeper, what are some of those issues that is making Africa in particular to be a safe haven for these rogue intermediaries? And also, what is missing in terms of knowledge? Because it seems even the footballers themselves, they don't know when they are being duped. Why do you think this is the case? Why is Africa in particular a safe haven for rogue intermediaries?
Look, I mean, Africa in itself, as well as other jurisdictions, have some of the same issues. But obviously, there's a volume of kids in Africa that love the sport. They see their heroes playing internationally, and they want to be a part of that and get the dream and earn the high wages and get the fame with that. But yeah, look, I think breaking it down to make it simplistic, it comes down to education. I mean, there's a lot of these issues, and obviously Africa is a large continent with many countries, large jurisdictions, and it comes down to the fact of arming kids with the necessary information that they need to create what we call a red flag, to make them aware of what type of methodologies are used by organised criminals and fraudsters in this area. And this could be as simple as education, even at the school level, even before you even get to the football levels of the federations and associations and so forth. It's where, the younger you can get to kids and actually provide them with the advice, and also basically educating the parents in relation to the things that will happen or won't happen. And so when we were talking about the methodologies of approach, knowing that an agent will never ask for money from you in an offer for something else. They'll usually approach you by a sporting organisation such as a Premier League club or a second division club will email you from a reputable email address, not from a Gmail account. All these little issues that we've highlighted before, which should basically provide some form of alert and actually tell kids, to basically maybe and parents to look at their due diligence when they've been approached by these issues. But what we'd love to see is communication at the lower levels, from schools through to grassroots, and even through to other leagues and clubs and confederations and federations, where they actually have this on their website, which makes it quite clear that what happens when you are recruited or approached by a scout, what the process is, and what are the checks and balances. So at any time they can just reach out, have a look on the internet, or pick up the phone and make a phone call before they enter into some of these agreements, which would save a lot of heartache.
All right. Well, there also seem to be two levels of what I might call exploitation. One is what we've here in Africa. We've had stories of where players would be approached, very young players would be approached by intermediaries, and their families have to part with money so that their kids can be facilitated to go abroad and play football. But a majority of these football players who perhaps have a very bright future would end up being dumped in some country, and they would not actually realize their dream, and then they have that problem of trying to come back home. And we also have the other one that somehow someone might think it's legal, but at the end of it all, it's actually very detrimental to the player. Where yes, you'll join a club, maybe a third or fourth, even fifth tier league, and you will play, but your contract is set up in a way that the agents will be getting a huge chunk of your wage. Well, how can players be protected from such exploitation? We know poverty also is a big issue, where people will see any opportunity and jump into it, and that is where there is a lot of exploitation. You've talked about matters, education, but how can we? What are some of the measures that we need to put in place in terms of education? You've talked about parents being involved, but what are other measures, or how can players be protected from this kind of exploitation?
Well, look, going back to the original question in relation to how we can actually stop it. I mean, obviously, education is the key. I mean, I've spoken to young kids in Paris who've come from Ghana, who've come from Mali, who've come from Cameroon, who've been promised basically that they'll come to Europe and be given trials, but they're basically surrounded by during those period of time with where there were individuals setting up fake trials. So therefore, it was another element to the fraud itself. So not only were they duped to come along and transfer themselves to another location and have the opportunity of being dumped at Garden or even hopefully at least getting to a location where they participated in an activity. That activity was actually established as a fraudulent activity to mask the fact that nothing was actually occurring. So there's so many checks and balances that need to be implemented, and I think education is the key to that. But the second part of your question was about exploitation in relation to their player rights and so forth, which is being looked at heavily by a number of particularly FIFA and other legal institutions in relation to what is expected for kids that are operating within the European Union or even outside of the European Union. There should be at least some minimum standards to ensure that they're not there on these long-term inappropriate contracts and almost being regarded as slave labor.
Mhm. And in your line of duty, how many? I don't want to ask how many, but do we have a situation where maybe in your line of duty you've apprehended, you've ensured that these rogue intermediaries perhaps have been brought to book, and does it happen often that they are nabbed so that they can be stopped from exploiting young footballers?
Oh, look, I mean, from our knowledge and the information that we do get, we create. I mean, from our side within the ICSS, our role is to basically collect information, collate, make some inquiries, and pass this information on to the appropriate authorities or through to sporting federations, particularly on some of these contracts which are drafted and provided to some of these kids. They've obviously got sports-based logos, so therefore there's a lot of other crime-related issues in relation to the forgeries that they've been created. So it's fake contracts which are being developed and so forth. So there's a number of other associated crimes that occur with some of these aspects in relation to developing this fraud and approach. So from what we see, it's pretty well much running rampant. It's very hard. It's probably not high on key law enforcement radars in relation to priorities, in relation to investigations worldwide, because it's everything. A lot of from this aspect is from a cyber perspective. So it's online. So they're basically sending out in mass a lot of these fake contracts and approaches to young kids, and hoping to get some return back. So any sort of amount that kids that do reply back and provide funding to them is a benefit to these organised criminals.
Mhm. Let's talk about the role of technology in luring these young players. Social media and recruitment apps are being used often by fake agents to lure young footballers because they have a dream to play. But how can we ensure that their interaction, especially on social media, they are protected so that they do not fall prey? And how much has the technology aided what is happening currently in terms of trafficking?
Yeah, sure. That's a very good question. Look, I mean, there's a number of platforms. You only need to jump on Google Apps and type in, applications for scouts and for players, and there's many to choose from. And you can, as a kid, you can sign up, log on, put your photograph on there, upload your videos, explain what best positions you want, put your contact details. But in relation to that as well, there needs to be some sort of responsibility as well from the people that provide these frameworks for due diligence. What sort of mechanisms are in place to actually work out, is this person who's applying as a scout on this platform, is he an actual legally operating scout? Is he above board? Or is he just basically going on there to get the contact details of these young kids, which we've been advised they're doing, and they're getting approached by WhatsApp and another platform such as Telegram and so forth. So basically there's a number of open platforms which provide direct access to youth. It's almost like a menu. So therefore, it is definitely a significant issue, and there needs to be a lot more work done in partnerships with a lot of these people that develop these apps. And I think if they work together, they can basically effectively, at least enhance the due diligence around their own platforms.
Mm-hmm. I would want to know, as we progress to issues in terms of data, well, in your own way, or after doing your own research, what would you advise maybe parents and young footballers and other maybe people who are interested, stakeholders in football business, when approached by an intermediary who is claiming to be in a position to place a player maybe in a club, or get them clubs where they can go for trials? What are some of the things, the telltale signs that indeed this is a rogue agent? How do you differentiate that?
I think, well, the best option is to ask as many questions from the agent as you can, especially if it's in a situation where you're face to face. It might make it far more easy. But if you're communicating via encrypted messages or via email, you've got to really ask those hard questions. And a lot of times, I think when we've been dealing with very good, competent scouts who've made contact with us, they've been basically the first line of defense, because they've asked the hard questions of these people purporting to be scouts in relation to what their background is, what access they do have to clubs, provide specific phone numbers, make contact, also make contact with clubs and so forth. So it's really important that parents are made aware. Even the fact that if kids are advised that there's going to be a trial at a certain club, to make contact with the club. That would be the first thing I'd do. And if there's any aspect of doubt by parents, is also to have mechanisms in place within those jurisdictions to actually make a report to law enforcement, or make an outreach to their federation as well. I mean, that would be a good first port of call. I mean, even like smaller communities, there would be knowledge from the coaching level, from those communities, that would have a fair idea as well. So collectively looking after the young kids who are training, if they're already operating and training in a young grassroots environment.
Quite true. So also the coaches, it's not all about training the young footballers techniques and how to play football. Also to look out because their future, their career in football might depend on how they deal with it. I was actually watching a clip on a young man who decided to never play football again because he was dumped somewhere. No club was waiting for him. He was dumped at the airport and he had to sleep in the streets for so many days before he could actually get back to Africa. And he decided to never play football, but he was a very good footballer. And for those perhaps who don't know that this is happening in football, I would want to know why is data on the prevalence of human trafficking through football in sports so scarce, and why is this, and what needs to be done for more proactive approach in combating the problem in terms of data? Why is it scarce?
Look, I think personally, a lot of these issues are also underreported. Because particularly a lot of the young kids that I spoke to when I was in France, a lot of them, I wouldn't call it trafficking per se. From my discussion, it was more smuggling in relation to being moved voluntarily from one location to the other into Europe. But obviously that didn't pan out. But that still doesn't mean that a smuggling issue can't turn into trafficking after circumstances of aggravation. So, but where they were in a situation where they did not want to leave after arriving there, and they sort of thought that they had a better opportunity in the new location than going home. Some were, as I think you've mentioned before, some were getting involved in other sort of criminal activities and so forth, but also others may not have had their own identity documents. So we have seen it during activities where they were having to be supplied with fake passport documentation and fake identity cards, because some of the other issues on top of that is if they've been come to a location illegally, they've been exported illegally, they don't have access to medical support dental support in those countries as well, within within, say, if it's within Europe. So those were other problematic issues that were being discussed by these young kids, and also looking at some of the other avenues when speaking to also some of the youth were being the way that were brought over by the methodologies, particularly young kids from Mali who were brought up through Mali by boat into Spain and then transferred across and then into Europe and being provided with fake documentation as well. So with what they said were Lebanese handlers who where they didn't actually pay a fee to be transported from Mali to Europe. So that adds other layers of complexities as to the movement of the child from one location to the other under the guise of football. So there's a lot of other sort of side complexities as well.
So perhaps they're using football as a guide, and maybe they just wanted to go to somewhere they would call as a more greener pasture, but without visas, without this proper documentation. What really becomes of these young footballers? At any given point, do their lives ever turn? Do they still play football, or what really becomes of them? Because we've also heard of stories where when they are there, they prefer to be there even without proper documentation. Maybe perhaps they said goodbye to everyone and everyone thought at home they were going to make it in football, and maybe there's that shame that they really don't want to come back home. What becomes of these young aspiring footballers if at all they do not want to come back home?
Look, if they don't want to come back home, they might be one of the lucky ones and still manage to work their way into lower league clubs, or even maybe work themselves up into a situation where they can actually make an effective living and actually enjoy and love the sport that they really treasure, being football. Or others might just totally go the opposite direction, where they get tied up in links to organised crime. Spoken to some young kids in Spain where they've been come out from the sports side angle, but they're involved in criminality, or down to being used for slave labour down in locations selling counterfeit products, to doing other sort of activities, servitude and so forth. So it could be very bleak outcome if they're stuck in a foreign country without the appropriate visas. And I understand what you're saying in relation to the fact of there's a lot of pressure on families back at home if they've been supported, if they've been financially supported, or parents have taken out loans to ensure that the kids have been able to travel across, and they've been duped. It puts the kids in a very, very tough situation to basically, even mentally, to work out what they do with themselves. Do they go back and face the issue? Or do they just keep struggling on and fighting on, hopefully that they'll one day make it and be able to be able to pay back their parents or other family, friends, and so forth?
All right. So there are also instances because we believe if you're in charge of the AFA or you're an authority in football, your work should be to ensure that football develops properly, the footballers are well developed, and maybe the leagues are running very well. But we've seen instances where football authorities are also, in a way, accomplices to human trafficking. Does the law ever catch up with them? And have you ever actually come across a situation where an authority in football is actually involved or is an accomplice to human trafficking?
Well, look, not from our side. I haven't personally dealt with working with a federation or confederation who's been involved in human trafficking or smuggling and so forth. I'm sure there might have been cases where there's been confederations or associations involved in match fixing and so forth, or other criminality, but not particularly this issue itself. That would be, there's many. We have an MOU with CAF, and there's a lot of exciting areas that are being implemented within Africa. I mean, FIFA's implementing a number of new mechanisms, especially enhancing the development of welfare officers, and that's one of the key areas. Is basically, I think, more so that we're seeing a specific change in enhancing of due diligence within the major football environments to look at this issue and actually basically create a better safeguarding opportunity and education for the youth. As you mentioned before about the coaches, about it's not all about training. I mean, one of the key aspects for a coach is to ensure the welfare and of the players. Especially when you look at the DNA, safe, fun, and engaging is the UKFA's DNA for youth when they're playing football, and that's a very, very simplistic approach, but it's that's where we need to be, and that's what the coach is one of those confidants that not only look after them in relation to the trafficking aspect, but also this also includes the manipulation aspect in relation to fixing matches when they get older, as sort of like older youth players per se. So there's a significant key role, but it's a top-down approach as well as a bottom-up.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, we need to do a lot of sensitization, and we've seen researchers doing their work to do sensitization work. We've seen NGOs, we've seen also investigative journalists. Like there's one who did an investigative piece somewhere in West Africa, and Football Authority was actually apprehended, and it's a lady, and she's currently, I think, serving time in jail for human trafficking and. Well, that was really good journalism, if you ask me. And other than that, who else, in your perspective, should be in the front line to sensitize our players so that they are not trafficked?
Oh, look, I mean, as I have mentioned previously about who are the big drivers behind raising awareness in this, and that it is NGOs, it is investigative journalists, and academics are the three of the major key areas. I mean, we see a lot of figures bantered around. I think we've seen the figures of 15,000 kids from Africa trafficked every year into Europe. I personally, I'm not aware of the actual the originations of those actual figures themselves, but I'd love to have obviously a better idea, a better understanding of the mapping in relation to trafficking and smuggling of youth through football or through sports in general, and to get a truer understanding of what the actual facts and figures are. But yeah, look, it's you can't sort of just individually sort of say that it has to be one sort of sector. It's got to be everybody from mums and dads education all the way through the actual sporting ecosystem and supply chain from end to end. So that there has to be constant messaging, and especially in today's environment where you mentioned before about technology. Well, there's the opportunities now for technology for good in relation to really getting these messages across, even down to innovative ways of getting these messages across, maybe inside Xbox games in relation to football. A message in relation to anti-trafficking and so forth, and what some of the these are the kids around the world who are playing these games. So we've got to look for innovative ways on how to get these messaging across.
Mm-hmm. Well, from how football is, especially here in Africa, young footballers, other than wanting to play for their national teams, they want to play in a big club, and mainly in Europe, because of how lucrative the league there is. And everyone thinks that football heaven is elsewhere, not in Africa. Football heaven is somewhere in Europe, and everyone wants to go there. But how can the clubs, how can Europe in particular work with Africa to protect young players? Because at the end of the day, Africa has very talented players. They have the right physique and they can play very good football. And that is what maybe a majority of these clubs want. And that is, and also you'd get them at a better rate as compared to buying another footballer in Europe in those other clubs. It becomes a bit affordable, let me use that word, to buy a player from Africa. So how can Europe work with Africa to ensure that these players are not exploited? At the end of the day, they get what they deserve?
Yeah, look, I mean, as you mentioned, there is significant talent in African football and within youth, and I think it could be, should be the responsibilities of European clubs, if they are going to recruit from Africa, they also hand in hand should be building the football ecosystem in Africa as well. So because with the amount of talent that's been moved to Europe, you can imagine if those players were playing in the regional competitions around the country, it would explode. I had the privilege of being in South Africa during the World Cup in 2010, and seeing the spirit of the community and the spirit of football within that country during that period of time. And I think if clubs are involved, and they do have academies or sister academies inside Africa, that they do their best to support local football and build up the local talent. And because I see what you're saying in relation to getting a cheaper player and then paying them there, then transferring over to Europe, and then on selling them and that sort of stuff. But that's where there has to be stronger regulations and protection mechanisms for the actual player and their contracts, etc.
All right. Let me ask about licensing. A while back, FIFA had the mandate to license agents, but later on that duty was delegated to national federations. But currently there are talks to revert that and that mandate to go back to FIFA so that they can do a bit of regulation. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it should revert? And by delegating there previously to national federation, do you think that is where loopholes emerged and the fake intermediaries started thriving?
Look, I mean, from what from this aspect about FIFA's possible thoughts of taking back regulation of licensed agents, my personal opinion, I think that's the perfect way to do it. But it's got to be quite a tiered approach. Like I think FIFA is well positioned to have the overarching vision over this initiative, but it needs to be controlled right down to grassroots in relation to the mapping and recording of this aspect, particularly from a technical perspective and from a data perspective, to have player agents recorded so they can't move from one country to the other. They've got a particular license that they've been issued, photographic. So basically the thing is totally above board and in relation to counterfeit and so forth. But you need to have the ability for people to report locally, and then the federations to report up through to FIFA. That would have, I would think, or suggest having an overarching international database on recorded player agents.
Mm-hmm. What does this say about national federations, especially in Africa, now that this role might be reverted back to FIFA? What does this say, especially about governance of football in Africa, and what does this say about national affairs?
Well, no, I think it would probably. I don't think it's anything adverse or negative against the federations or confederations within the regions of Africa. I think it's actually really just pressing reset and realigning the process for the recording of player agents. I think it makes good sense to have something which is overarching, but also there will still need to be mechanisms to manage the agents in country. I mean, it would be too hard to do from one specific location out of Switzerland. But I think it's a good approach. But no, I don't think it's anything counterintuitive for that. But it's I think it would be a way to better map and track the player agents involved.
Mm-hmm. To transfer a minor, let's say from a club to club, would you kindly bring us up to speed? What are some of those processes, especially if you're dealing, for example, in my country, anyone below the ages of 18 is a minor, and someone else has to make decisions in regards to so many things that they might want to do with themselves, even in their own career. But what are some of the processes of transferring a minor, maybe from a club to a club?
From club to a club, you have to have. There's a number of mechanisms put in place from FIFA in relation to making sure that they're not being moved for an unspecific purpose. Apart from the fact that the parents are being moved as well, there's a number of mechanisms in place to ensure that they're not just being transferred by themselves. So they have to have parental supervision and support, and obviously they have a full program for themselves when they actually arrive at that location.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that perhaps FIFA is doing enough to protect minors? And where would you say are these loopholes? Because we've seen these rogue intermediaries having their way, and they actually know how to go around these rules. So do you think FIFA is doing enough to protect the minors? And if there are loopholes, where are they?
No, I think they definitely are. I mean, FIFA is looking at introducing specific new safeguarding guidelines and also enhanced training in relation to welfare officers. I think even the thought process about looking at getting intermediaries registered and licensed into a centralised body, they're doing. They're obviously focusing particularly quite strongly now on that governance aspect. So I think. Things are changing for the better, absolutely. So there's definitely a number of approaches that are being done to ensure that there's an enhanced level of due diligence and governance around the way that players are transferred.
Mm-hmm. So in our previous episode, we did talk in depth in terms of the labor market here in Africa, and one thing that was so clear are the weak regulations and in terms of governance in Africa. And what would be your view in regards to some of the measures the continent, that is the AU, national governments and football associations, can put in place to exploit to ensure that the exploitation of young footballers is curtailed?
Well, you have, I mean, obviously from the African perspective, obviously with the number of countries involved, it would have to be obviously looking at the main aspects is governance. At the end of the day, it's making sure that there's in tune governance across the country. So there's not one different jurisdiction has another aspect to the governance rules around this aspect of player transfers and so forth. But it's all about the fact if they have the right measures in place, they've got the right communications in place, they've got strong internal governance, not just within player trafficking, but across all football governance within their environment. They have dedicated integrity officers that are aware of this issue, who can then educate down to the other national capabilities within the country, down to the lower playing groups. That's where it's going to be the best positive results for this issue around this process of player transfers, to make sure that any sort of opportunities for manipulation is stamped out.
Mm-hmm. Previously, we've seen clubs being sanctioned over the same, especially recruiting minors, which is against FIFA regulations. Recently, we did have Real Madrid, Atletico also being sanctioned. What's the possible outcome, especially if a club is found culpable of breaking some of these rules? And previously, do we have clubs? What really happens if they are caught to have perhaps not followed the right channel?
Oh, I mean, all these aspects will be obviously governed by FIFA from their perspective. So, I mean, it's hard to comment exactly what would be any sort of outcomes when they're conducting their investigations or inquiries. But obviously, they've got stringent rules in place and ramifications if there are any breaches and so forth. But for a start, you've got to have at least the governance in place to obviously provide the opportunity to make sure that clubs will think twice about entering into these aspects of illegal transfers. And the fact that they're getting caught is an actual benefit to show that what's been put in place has actually worked. So it's actually a positive from the FIFA perspective that these aspects are being picked up, and if they're big clubs and they're being challenged. So it's not a fact of like a big club is trying to pressure the process not to be reported. So it's a good sign.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a lot of feedback, especially through our social media platform, and we'll be taking a couple of questions in a few. But what is the International Center for Sport Security doing in terms of human trafficking, ensuring that it is curtailed? How is the organization planning to work with various also stakeholders to ensure that the sport is safe for all, and especially in regards to this issue we are discussing today, that is human trafficking through football?
Well, basically, the International Center for Sport Security, there's three pillars that we work on, which is safety, security, and integrity. And the work that we've been looking at in relation to player trafficking comes within this sports integrity unit. And so we've been active in relation to receiving reports on cases in relation to player trafficking, or basically being approached by dubious scouts, intermediaries. So in these instances, what we've done in the past and what we've done recently is that we create what we call an intelligence alert, where we basically, as a clearinghouse mechanism, we collect the information, do some ground-based analytical work, build up some intelligence work, and then we provide those reports to specific areas. So, for example, if there is a key issue where there has been a breach, and there's also been use of specific logos of an international federation, we've provided those reports directly to that organisation. So we have provided reports to FIFA in the past as well on certain issues, so they're kept aware of the information that we get that comes across to us. But from international sports security side, we do work with a number of sporting organisations, governments, the United Nations. We have recently signed an MOU with CAF in relation to security, and we look for every single opportunity to work with everybody from law enforcement, governments, the private sector, even down to journalists who are involved in particular aspects of any sort of crime-based issues. So if there's issues in relation to player trafficking, we've reached out recently and to specific organisations. We got introduced to yourselves, which is an absolute benefit as well. To look forward to working in support of the Football Foundation of Africa and sharing information in relation to some of the activities on ground in the region, and also reached out to one of the integrity officers of the European Football Association. So all these sort of top things, particularly from the latest outreach, has happened quite recently. So from the emergence of communicating this critical issue. So what we'll be doing is doing a lot more emphasis in relation to my other side of the work, which is protection, which is building up relationships, building up networks, and building up platforms to basically highlight the issue, but more importantly, actually start to get some more information in through our doors, so we can start better looking at the analytics and actually get a better understanding of the volume of the issue. And because at the moment there's a number of organisations doing fantastic work in different silos, and some of the areas that we sort of promote and champion with the ICSS is really about building networks to fight networks and sharing information. So that's one of the key things to really get a grip on some of these issues. Is really, you can't do it alone, and it's an opportunity to actually work close hand in hand with other key networks around the world, and basically start building up that trust and relationship where you can actually start sharing information and start seeing some active results. And I think once you start seeing active results, you start getting far more traction and interest to actually get together and actually then start getting some good outcomes and really highlight this issue further to the broader community and governments.
All right. It's that time that we start taking questions and also recommendations and opinions from our audience this evening. And we start with James Rogoy, and he is asking, which fronts can this kind of trafficking be tackled effectively? He's saying he watched some horror documentary where the system has very well entrenched agents in Africa.
Well, I think the issue of effectively tackling this thing, as we mentioned before, is about education, but also from the fact that you might find that people who are acting as rogue intermediaries will be involved in other crime activities. So it's basically, working with actually law enforcement, and governments and sporting organisations to identify who some of these individuals are, because I think a lot of this stuff would be underreported. So it would be interesting to get far more information and intelligence in relation to people who are involved. Start finding those reporting mechanisms within the local footballing authorities or through to the national sporting bodies, so we can actually start getting information, particularly on who these individuals are. Because what we're seeing in relation to some of the recent approaches for youth in Africa is people purporting to be from Eastern European countries, such as Slovak and also Ukraine. And so it's individuals might be embedded. For example, we've seen examples from people who are operating in Nigeria, but they're running from frameworks which have been designed in Eastern Europe. So it's a matter of, there's a lot of complexities in relation to identifying where these individuals are. Also, there's a lot of work that could be done in relation to identifying who's behind the social media platforms. We have in the past dealt with Facebook a number of years ago in relation to making approaches in relation to some of these intermediaries who spend a fair bit of time creating these fake platforms on these social media situations such as Facebook and LinkedIn. And these are the sort of type things that we need this information so we can actually build that intelligence, make the right approaches, and build the right relationships with tech stakeholders, so we can actually then start identifying some of these individuals and obviously have the appropriate law enforcement action taken upon them.
All right. Well, Naki Kadu is saying, I am part of a community interest company in Uganda whose objective work with local schools and focuses on grassroots development in Africa, chess and boxing, ages 5 to 16. We welcome guidance and educational resources we can instill and build into the development pathway for our beneficiary. All right. Thank you so much, Naki Kadu, for tuning in and watching this very informative session of today's episode. Let's take a look at another one from Jonathan Fowler. He's saying, can international organizations, both in sports and world and in the non-sport world, do more work together to get anti-trafficking messages across and tackle the issue? Maybe we can tackle that one as well. People need to actually work together and combat human trafficking through football.
Look, absolutely. And there's a number of key organizations from ILO through to the United Nations, many sporting organizations such as FIFA, UEFA, law enforcement organizations such as Interpol and Europol. I mean, it is definitely on their radar. I mean, there's obviously the United Nations Development Goals, which is specifically stated in relation to issues in relation to trafficking and smuggling of youth. And so, but you can never have too much information. Like we've just recently had a conference and we're talking about big data and sharing information. That's a lot of times we've got all the mechanisms in place, we've got all the legal instruments in place, but sometimes it just falls down because of communication. So look, I can't underestimate the key value of as many organizations working together to highlight this issue and also keep it front and center. That's the biggest issue, that it'll come in spurts. A lot of times it gets communicated around major sporting events, particularly you always see the articles in relation to the Super Bowl popping up every time that occurs, and then it dies back down again. And so it's one of those things where, because it's such a critical issue which is facing youth in sport, that we've got to work out mechanisms to make sure that it is continually communicated. And so yeah, that was a really good question, but it's definitely a critical one.
All right. Well, before we wind the show, I'd want to hear your final remarks in tackling this issue in Africa. What would be your final remarks so that everyone can play football and in safe environments without exploitation?
Right. Look, absolutely. Look, I think there's a lot of things changing within Africa. We've seen some amazing work being done by CAF recently, and we're looking forward to supporting some of their activities and their work from the ICSS. But it goes back to education being the key. Cannot underestimate how to plan the communication levels from the top, from government through the sporting federations, down to grassroots, down to children's education, and find as many platforms as possible to basically show those simple methodologies of what would be expected for a criminal approach in relation to a criminal intermediary. I mean, they're quite basic. Probably a child would only need to know about 4 or 5 of those, maybe even just a couple. The parents just need to know a couple just to raise a flag, to raise the question. So if we can get those communicated on various websites, sporting websites, give them a reporting line, let them know what they need to do. What happens if they do get an approach? Do they call the club? Do they speak to their coach? Can they call a hotline in relation to that issue in that country? Like we have a hotline, we get reports coming into us. Maybe there's the same mechanism that occurs in each jurisdiction in the African regions. If it hasn't got one, it would be good to establish those as well. But that would be my key thing, is education and communication.
Mm-hmm. How can people reach you in particular, and also ICSS? Because a lot of guys watching, they are thrilled and perhaps they would want to know more and also want to learn and to find help. So how can they reach you and also reach ICSS?
Sure, we have a website, and it's called www.theiCSS.org. On that, there's an opportunity to make contact with the Sport Integrity Unit on there. There's an email for that, and you can pass that information on. We also have an intelligence hotline as well, which is based in Canada, and the information that we use is managed in the United Kingdom, where our intelligence databases and information is looked at and managed. And so you can actually make a report directly to our hotline, and that way we'll have a person who can take that call in over 220 plus languages, 365 days, 7 days a week. and they'll provide that information directly to us, to the investigators at the SIU, and then we'll vet and have a look at those cases, and then we can make contact in a confidential and secure way, which is fully encrypted. So it's a good mechanism that can be used as a tool for people that would like to report in.
All right, quite impressive, very enlightening. And for all those guys who are watching, you can actually share this link with stakeholders, young footballers, coaches, and anyone who is interested in ensuring that football develops properly and we curtail this particular issue of human trafficking through football. Well, our link at FAA Media. Feel free to share it, and also remember that this particular special session has been brought to you by the Foundation for Africa in collaboration with Sports Legal. Let me take this opportunity before we call it an evening where we are to just thank you so much. That was very enlightening, Mr. Fred, and hopefully in the future we get to talk more and more and get to understand where we are as Africa and also globally in terms of eradicating this vice. Thank you so much for giving us time to talk to you tonight.
That's my pleasure, Florence. Thank you very much.
All right. And also many thanks to all our partners, that is OTB Africa, Palmer Sports, See Beyond Leadership Forum, as well as UNICAF, and also many thanks to the Foundation for Africa in collaboration with Sports Legal for making things happen, or also ensuring that our continent, our footballers, our stakeholders are kept abreast with all important issues that they need to know in terms of football and other things that join with football. Thank you so much for watching this special session. My name is Florence Ndongo, and make sure that every Thursday you get to tune in and get to find out what Foundation for Africa has in store for you. Good night and God bless.